I taught at a university for 44 years. 44 years of classrooms and seminars and the particular intimacy of a tutorial where a student and a teacher sit across a table from each other with a question between them that neither of them can fully answer. I worked with thousands of students across every level, from the undergraduate encountering serious thinking for the first time to the doctoral candidate who had spent 7 years at the edge of what was known in their field. And I worked alongside hundreds of colleagues, brilliant and ordinary and everything in between, across 4 decades of academic life, and in 44 years of watching human intelligence operate across that entire range. I arrived at a finding that surprised me the first time I understood it clearly, and that I have not been able to stop thinking about in the 30 years since. The smartest people I ever knew were not the most educated. They were not the ones who had accumulated the most knowledge, or the most credentials, or the most publications. The smartest people I ever knew were the ones who were most acutely, almost painfully aware of how much they did not know, and who were the most urgently, persistently, almost hungrily interested in addressing that gap. The person with the most degrees was not always the most formidable mind in the room. The person asking the most genuine questions, not the rhetorical ones, not the ones designed to demonstrate that they had already thought of this, almost always was. I am 84 years old, and I want to talk to you about the most important intellectual quality a human being can possess. Not intelligence in the sense of IQ or processing speed or the ability to hold complex systems in the mind. The specific, cultivatable, entirely choiceable quality of remaining a hungry learner across the whole of a life. The ones who maintained it were the finest minds I ever encountered, regardless of their credentials. The ones who lost it became progressively less interesting to talk to, less capable of contribution, less alive in the specific way that learning keeps a mind alive, and the losing of it was never an inevitable consequence of age or of accumulation. It was always, in every case I observed, a choice made in the direction of certainty, a preference installed gradually and invisibly for the comfort of knowing over the discomfort of not yet knowing. Let me tell you about 2 students who arrived in my department in the same year. The first was a young man named Christopher. Christopher was, by every measurable standard, the most qualified student in his cohort. His examination results were extraordinary. His undergraduate thesis had been described by his referee as one of the finest produced in a decade. He came to graduate study with the specific confidence of someone who had been told for the last several years in succession that they were exceptional. And Christopher was exceptional. In the specific narrow band of the knowledge he had already mastered, he was genuinely remarkable. But Christopher had a relationship with his own knowledge that I came to understand, over the first year of working with him, was the thing most likely to limit him. He treated his existing knowledge as a position to be defended, rather than a foundation to build from. Every encounter with something he did not know or had not considered was experienced visibly as a threat to the edifice. He asked few genuine questions. He made many confident assertions. He was most comfortable in conversations where his existing expertise was confirmed, and most uncomfortable in conversations where it was challenged or complicated. He was, in the specific sense I mean, not a hungry learner. He was an accomplished knower. And the distinction matters enormously. The second student was a young woman named Priya. Priya's measurable qualifications were good, but not exceptional. She was not the most prepared student in the cohort by the conventional metrics, but Priya had a quality that I recognized within the first few weeks of knowing her, and that I had learned by that point in my career to value above almost everything else a student can bring to their work. Priya was genuinely, insatiably curious, not performatively, not in the way that some students perform curiosity as a form of intellectual positioning, in the specific, organic, entirely unself-conscious way of someone for whom not knowing is not a problem to be managed, but an invitation to be accepted. She asked questions that revealed the real shape of her thinking rather than its most polished surface. She was willing to be wrong, publicly, in real time in front of her colleagues, and to revise her position visibly when the evidence required it. She was at her most animated when she encountered something she did not understand, rather than when she encountered something she did. 20 years after both of them left my department, Christopher had produced a respectable but undistinguished body of scholarship that largely confirmed and elaborated his existing positions. He was regarded as reliable and competent within his field. Priya had become one of the most genuinely innovative minds in her discipline, not because she was more intelligent than Christopher in the conventional sense, because she had maintained the specific orientation toward learning that he had exchanged, somewhere in the process of becoming an expert, for the orientation toward knowing. The expert trap, that is what I call it. The expert trap is the specific, very common, largely invisible cognitive transition in which the accumulation of knowledge begins to work against the acquisition of further knowledge, where what you know begins to function as a filter rather than a foundation, where the comfort of your established expertise becomes a preference that shapes what you are willing to encounter, what questions you are willing to ask, what discomfort you are willing to sustain in the service of continued learning. The tragic thing about the expert trap is that it feels like wisdom. It feels like the natural and appropriate consequence of decades of hard-earned knowledge. It feels like the settled authority of someone who has done the learning and arrived at the conclusions. And so people stay in it without knowing they are in it, because being in it feels like being at the destination rather than being stuck. You are never at the destination. The destination does not exist. Understanding is not a place you arrive at. It is a practice you maintain. And the moment you treat your current understanding as sufficient, as something to be protected and confirmed rather than built upon and challenged, the practice begins to atrophy. 3 things. From 84 years of living and 44 years at the frontier of knowledge in a specific discipline and watching what the hungry learners did differently. First, protect your beginner's mind. The beginner's mind is the quality that Priya had and that Christopher gradually lost. It is the ability to encounter the familiar with fresh eyes, to sit with not knowing without rushing to resolve it, to ask the question that seems too basic to ask, and to find, by asking it, that it was the most important question in the room. It sounds simple. It is not. The beginner's mind is under constant pressure from 2 directions. From the inside, from the accumulated confidence of knowing, which slowly and imperceptibly narrows the range of what seems worth questioning. From the outside, from a culture that rewards expertise and credentials in the performance of a rival, that interprets questions as evidence of inadequacy rather than evidence of intellectual rigor. You must actively, deliberately, specifically protect the beginner's mind. Not by pretending you do not know things you know, but by treating your knowledge as a beginning rather than a destination, by sitting with questions longer before resolving them, by seeking out the fields you know nothing about, not to become expert in them, but to remember what not knowing feels like, and to practice the specific quality of openness that not knowing requires. The beginner's mind is not the absence of knowledge. It is the refusal to let knowledge become the enemy of curiosity. Second, ask more questions than you answer. This is the practical discipline of the hungry learner, and it is measurable. In any given conversation about a subject that matters to you, count the questions you ask versus the assertions you make. If the assertions outnumber the questions by a significant margin, the expert trap is operating. The questions I mean are not rhetorical ones, not the ones you ask when you already know the answer and are checking whether the other person does. The genuine ones, the ones that reveal the actual edge of your understanding rather than the most polished surface of it. The ones that might reveal that you were wrong, the ones that introduce genuine uncertainty into a conversation you could have kept comfortable and controlled. The finest minds I encountered across 44 years asked questions at a rate that would have made most people uncomfortable. Not because they were confused, they were not. Because they understood in a way that the merely competent did not, that the question is where the thinking actually happens. The answer is just where you pause before the next question. Make asking your primary intellectual mode, not knowing, not asserting. Asking, and letting the asking be genuine. Third, your expertise is your greatest obstacle to your next insight. This is the hardest thing I know, and it is the thing I most want to leave with the people who have sat in my classrooms and who will go on to become experts in their own right. The knowledge you have worked hardest to acquire is the knowledge most likely to prevent you from acquiring the knowledge that will matter most next. Not because it is wrong, because it is established, because it is the lens through which you see, and the lens shapes what you see. And the very depth and quality of your expertise makes it the most natural and least examined frame you possess. Christopher's problem was not that he was too educated, it was that his existing education had become invisible to him as an assumption. He could not see around it anymore because he had stopped looking for the edges of it. The practice I am recommending is not ignorance. It is the specific, regular, deliberately uncomfortable practice of going to the edge of what you know and sitting there in the discomfort of the frontier, long enough to hear the questions that your expertise normally suppresses. The questions that seem naive or obvious from inside your expert frame, but that are, very often, the questions that matter most. Go to the edge, regularly. Sit in the not knowing. Let the expertise be the beginning rather than the answer. I am 84 years old, and I am still learning things that surprise me. Not every day, and not in every area, that regularly enough and deeply enough that the surprise still comes. And the surprise, when it arrives, is still the most alive I feel. That is what I want for you. Not to be brilliant, not to be the most qualified person in the room, to remain, for the whole of your life, the person who is most genuinely, persistently, hungrily interested in what they do not yet know, because the smartest people I ever knew were not the most educated, they were the most curious. And they were the most curious not because curiosity was their gift, because they protected it when the culture pressured them to exchange it for certainty, because they chose it, day after day, against the specific gravity of a world that wanted them to arrive. Stay hungry, not for achievement, for understanding. The two are completely different and produce completely different lives. Stay a learner, for all of it.